We'll move on to our second panel, to an issue that has dominated in recent months. We have a panel of experts to explain the exponential growth of AI, what direction it's going, what opportunities there are for Ireland in this sphere. So our moderator is Emma Madigan. She leads the team on artificial intelligence in the Department of Foreign Affairs. Thank you, Emma. We have Professor Barry O'Sullivan from University College Cork, Centre for Research Training in Artificial Intelligence. We have Dr. Alessandra Sala, Senior Director of AI and Data Science at Shutterstock, Global President of Women in AI and Co-Chair of UNESCO Women for Ethical AI. Dónal Travers, Head of Technology at the IDA. And Ciarán O'Mara, co-founder and CTO of the tech company Protex AI.
Thank you, Shona. Good afternoon, everyone. Hard act to follow with the Taoiseach, but we'll do our best. My name, as Shona said, is Emma Madigan. I lead the team within the department working on technology and international policy. Increasingly, given the pace of developments in the tech sphere, the intersection of tech and foreign policy and geopolitics is increasingly clear, and in fact is across all the multilateral fora in which we work. And so as a result, the Department of Foreign Affairs is deepening its work in this area. That's against a backdrop of Ireland's own work in this area, including, for example, nominating an AI ambassador last year, Dr. Patricia Scanlon, as part of our national AI strategy, and also being proactive in Europe in terms of contributing to the development of the AI Act. So it's clear that with emerging technology, Team Ireland, and we're all part of Team Ireland, as the Taoiseach put it so well, it's clear that we need to work together, to collaborate across business, across government, across civil society, and across academia. And I hope this afternoon we can give you a little bit of an insight into what that looks like. We know that AI can be a force for good, but there are challenges. And I think our panel will look into that a little bit more. I think increasingly AI is prevalent across the media, of course, but also in the movies we watch, in science fiction. And sometimes it's difficult maybe to differentiate between fact and fiction. Again, I think our panel is well placed to help us with that. So over we go to the panel. So if I may start with Alessandra and Barry. Can I ask you what you see as the biggest trends at the moment in emerging tech and AI, and what are the implications for Ireland? Maybe Alessandra, you might go first?
Sure. Thank you for having me here. I hope you hear me. It's always an honor to be with all of you, and Ireland is placed in this AI revolution, a very strong position. Which are the biggest emerging trends? First of all, let's start to acknowledge that AI, it's already in our lives. We use it to navigate, to shop, medicine. It's more and more supported and augmented from intelligent algorithms. And how is it changing this world? This world is changing in a way that will help us to be more productive in those mundane tasks that we don't really enjoy very much doing. I was the other day with some professor at university. Barry can comment on that. One of the things that professors really don't like to do, it's scoring homeworks, right? Students don't like to take those or do those homework. Professors don't like scoring homeworks. Those tasks can be redesigned, can be reinvented. We like playing games. We like challenge each other. AI can bring that level of interactivity, that level of fun into our learning process and completely change some of the tasks that we do today in industry, in academia, and in our real life.
Barry.
Yeah, great, thank you. So it's a huge honour to be here, so thanks to the department for having me on the panel. It's a real honour. Some of the big trends, I guess the big trend, the reason why everybody talks about AI today probably is because of things like ChatGPT and what we call more generally generative AI systems. And these are systems that can create something that looks like it was created by a human being. And so almost every form of media you can imagine, be it text or video or sound, these can be generated very, very quickly by AI systems. And so you can imagine the kind of opportunities, but also the challenges that creates. So that's the first thing. I suppose the other major trend is in the area of regulation. So maybe 10 years ago, maybe less than 10 years ago, most countries in the world started thinking about the ethics of artificial intelligence. So how AI was going to impact on the human rights of individuals, how it was going to impact on the fabric of society. So a large number of countries have developed their own ethics guidelines. At the moment, there's probably maybe 150 different sets of international ethics guidelines, which look almost the same. But I often say that, that AI is a field that is divided by a common language, and I don't need to tell a room full of diplomats the importance of language. So just because it says the same thing doesn't mean that it means the same thing. So that's the second big trend. I think the third big trend is regulation that comes out of that. So Europe is introducing the AI Act, and of course there are concerns about whether regulating a technology like that specifically is going to harm innovation, and I have some concerns there. I was the Vice Chair of the European Commission's high-level expert group that actually started developing the ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI, and in some sense the regulatory framework that we have in Europe today. And I think the fourth big trend, and one that we don't tend to talk about very much, is the intersection of the practice of diplomacy and geopolitics and artificial intelligence. And what I mean is that AI has become almost a sort of a battle, it's almost a domain of negotiation. You saw that, for example, last week, the US Department of Commerce introduced very strict export control restrictions on AI, specifically targeted to a rather large Asian country that starts in C and ends in INA. And so these are four major things, and I think we have to be wary of those. I think we shouldn't fall foul of, if I may sort of put forward another trend. There's a trend towards overstatement and dystopian rhetoric, and I think irresponsible communication. And so we've heard over the last number of months people who, frankly, should know better, talking to us about the existential threat posed by AI to humanity. I would encourage you not to believe it. I would encourage you to consider climate change to be an existential threat. I would consider the geopolitical state of the world to be in some sense an existential threat, but the technology itself is not. And I think it's really going to be important that we can talk about AI and that we communicate AI very, very accurately and precisely. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. I think we'll keep that in our minds as we discuss that it shouldn't be seen as an existential threat. Thank you. Dónal and Ciarán, if I could turn to you both, in terms of Ireland being a technology leader, what do you think we should be focusing our attention on over the next year? Maybe Dónal first, yeah?
Emma, thanks for the question. Thanks for having me here, and likewise it's an honour to be in front of this audience and to be with such distinguished panel members as well. I think AI feels like almost an overnight sensation after 50 years. And there's been we've been talking about AI for a long time in IDA, and we've had a proposition for nearly 10 years at this stage around AI and what you can do with AI in developing your own proposition inside the enterprise for many, many years. But now we're seeing a bit of a gold rush, and that's been brought on by obviously the advent of, as Barry called it, generative AI and ChatGPT in particular. That's made it very real for people, for citizens, and anybody can get onto ChatGPT at home and spin up an essay or a speech or
not that we do that, just to be very clear, in foreign affairs we don't do that, but yes.
Or if you've seen your children do their school essays using it, you're in trouble. But what we're seeing now is, if I go over the last 10 years, we've seen companies develop applications in lots of different areas, in financial services to help security posture, in the automotive sector, machine vision to develop better solutions for car safety, in the cloud space, making better processes around cloud workflows so that traffic moves more efficiently in the cloud, or in the networking space where you can automate a lot of the process to direct network traffic in particular areas and make it much more efficient. So that's been really important, and there's a lot of activity built up in our client base around that. Companies with real scale, including Alessandra's company Shutterstock, or Jaguar Land Rover down in County Clare, and many other examples. I think what we're going to see now is, first of all, what we're hearing is if a company doesn't have an AI strategy, the boardrooms are asking why. So they're saying to their executive teams, what are we doing about AI? What's our AI capability? What's our AI posture? And if they can't answer that, they're bloody well finding out pretty quickly that they need to have one. So that's a question that's coming at us pretty fast. And I think what we're seeing is, first of all, the immense ability of generative AI, whether it's in an enterprise application or a consumer application, is very real. And companies are rushing to make sure that they have that capability. And Ireland is a really good location to do it. We've got a really super STEM talent base. We have an AI capability that's been building for many years, and that's now helping us. We never have enough talent. That's a global problem, much more than an Irish one. The other things to think about as well from an AI perspective is it requires an infrastructure behind it. It requires cloud infrastructure. It requires chips to run the devices, to run the servers, and so on. All of that has a base in Ireland that's really strong, and that's an area that we're going to build on. And then the third piece you might think about is from a regulation perspective, and Barry touched on that as well. And we've seen some companies who are talking to us about how do they build teams to answer the regulatory challenge that's ahead of them in Ireland from an engineering perspective and from a business perspective.
Thanks, Dónal. That's really interesting. And Ciarán, if I could ask you, with a company that I think is just around the corner, so very much based here, your perspective on that in terms of Ireland being seen as a technology leader.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I'll speak from the startup side of things, and also the academic side as well, because we kind of plug into the academic network as well. Yeah, I think one thing that Ireland has done really well is that collaboration between academia and industry. And as Dónal said, the overnight sensation that's been in the works for 50 years. This research has been coming through the universities in Ireland and internationally, for years and years. And so we have talent in-house that we can plug into, in the likes of Protex, our company, and the startup ecosystem, and also being able to collaborate with academia to actually innovate. And to Barry's point on, trying to innovate and trying to figure out what the regulations are and innovate around those as well is another conversation. So I think for us, what we see is, we're able to get the talent that we need here. We're able to hire, world-class AI talent right here in Ireland. We have, hubs over in Galway with the likes of Vallejo. We have hubs down in Limerick with the likes of Van Like Devices and Intel. We claim Intel and Jaguar. Shannon is just outside Limerick. I'm a Limerick man, so I'm going to claim them. And then in Dublin as well, with the multinationals like Google, like HubSpot, like Microsoft. And so for us, finding talent is always hard finding talent, but we can see it here. I think the other thing that, again, isn't an overnight piece or overnight kind of ecosystem is the startup ecosystem. And I think we can see more and more kind of investment being pumped into that sector, particularly with the likes of Dogpatch Labs here in Dublin and the NDRC with the accelerator, which is looking to kind of maybe take a chip off the block as to what they're doing over in San Francisco. And I think when you marry the two of those together, academia and startups, you're bound to find innovation. When you put excellent academics alongside excellent entrepreneurs, you're going to be able to bring technology to industry. And so at Protex, we've been able to leverage some of the research that's been around for years and years and apply it to a problem space where we can actually make a difference.
Okay, thanks a million. That's really interesting. And I think it kind of raises, we're talking here about opportunities, which is so important. But then, of course, there are some challenges. And the media does tend to focus on those, whether they be an existential threat or not. And I think one thing is around ethical AI. Yes, it can solve maybe some of society's biggest problems, but it needs to do that in a responsible and safe way. Alessandra, I know this is a particular area of expertise for you. Would you mind, explaining to us really what ethical AI is and how can you ensure it is being done?
Yes, it's a very profound question. I like to start with a simple example. Imagine I take an innocent kid and I teach violence and I teach discrimination, and I teach violent language. And then I take another innocent kids, and I teach value, and I teach respect, and I teach collaboration and respect for human beings. Which of the two kids would you like to bring to your family and be part of your life journey? And that's the dilemma that we have today in technology. We have brought into our life technology that unfortunately has been trained, technically we say trained, which is built with a lot of example that as human we do not agree with. We do not stand with violent language, with discrimination, with pornography, and all the other issues that we know internet is full of. And those are the data that often are used to build those systems. So the ethical stand, it's to take a pause and say what kind of system we want to bring into our life, what kind of value those systems have to respect, because they do have an impact in our life. For example, I do not want to be discriminated when I apply for a job simply because there are no many female engineers in the workforce, and therefore a system that has been trained on example of the past will prefer Dónal. And Dónal is amazing, but I want to have a fair chance too, right? And this is for every other real example. Loan, life opportunity, medicine. We need to remember that those systems need to be able to interact and operate with all our human diversity. So ethical principles really stand at the base on how we want to build those systems, and therefore UNESCO is bringing 193 countries together to agree on a recommendation on the ethical principle of AI, which we are now trying to implement in industry, in academia, with different governments around the world, and demonstrate that those are not just wishful thinking or things good to have, but they can be implemented in practice.
Thanks. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Could I just pick up on a point, Alessandra? What would you say to someone who said, okay, you're talking about taking it slow, you know, and build the building blocks, but what about innovation? We want to be moving fast. How do you marry those two kind of possibly contradictory points?
We believe they are contradictory. I say, I'm an engineer, throw me a problem, I'll solve it. You make it harder, I'll solve it, right? That's what we are trained for. It's not how difficult is the problem that we solve. So having those ethical constraints, yes, does make the problem a little bit more difficult, but it doesn't mean that it is unsolvable. And think about in medicine. We do not take medicine that have not been approved because we want to make sure they do not hurt us. Medical device go through actual approval before they can be used. Same kind of regulation. We are not reinventing the wheel. Obviously, there is this movement of, say, regulation will starve innovation because in the Wild West, everyone can do whatever they want. So it's a comfy place to be, but in reality, it's a problem that we can solve.
Thank you. And Barry, did you want to come into that? I want to particularly ask you also about the point Ciarán made about the positive engagement between academia, if you like, and industry. Yeah. But sometimes the language might be off-putting for those who aren't necessarily in that space.
Yeah, I think I've worked in AI ethics for a long time, and I think it's absolutely a critical thing. I think this idea, as Alessandra said, that there's in some sense a contradiction between innovation and being ethical. I don't think that's true. The public expect systems to be trustworthy. You know, I think we've had a long run of advanced technologies that maybe haven't performed illegally in some sense, but they've performed in a way that the public found unacceptable. And I think that people expect that their technologies are trustworthy, that they're reliable, that they're not harming them, and I think that's where the notion of ethics hits the road. But I think from an Irish perspective, I think there's another dimension to ethics beyond the commercial that we need to think about, and I think. And not a lot of people are thinking about this. I think Ireland has a huge reputation in AI. I mean, it has a huge legacy in AI, and it has a big reputation. So what's its legacy? Well, the father of symbolic reasoning in AI, George Boole, did his work here in Ireland at UCC. Alan Turing, who formed the Turing test, he was his mother was from County Clare. His parents were married here in Dublin in St. Bart's. The term artificial intelligence is a term that was developed by John McCarthy, whose father emigrated from Cahersiveen. And the reason why we talk about AI at all is because of Geoffrey Hinton, who was the great-great-grandson of George Boole. Right? So we have a right and a heritage to talk about AI, and I think we should do that. We shouldn't apologize for the fact that we're a small country and that we're not pouring billions into this technology, and we shouldn't worry so much that maybe we're not developing all of the products and the ethics is not our responsibility. I think given the room and the expertise that we have, I think where the ethical dimension of AI comes into play is in the challenge that AI poses for truth, democracy, for the practice of your day job as diplomats, understanding what is real, what is not real, what's good information, what's not good information. And I think Ireland has a fantastic role to play in becoming the country that drives a diplomatic mission around artificial intelligence. I've been involved in these types of things for maybe 6 or 7 years, mostly working at a Track 2 level. Don't scream at me. Working between the US and China, trying to develop codes of conduct for the use of AI in intelligence contexts, in military contexts, and the question always is who's going to be the group in the middle that's going to facilitate that. And I think that's Ireland, frankly. I think we have a fantastic legacy in the Sustainable Development Goals, in the International Law of the Sea, and I think we should take the ethical thinking that Alessandra spoke about, and we should bring it into the world of diplomacy. And I think we have all of the credentials to lead in that sense. And I think that would be something that I would really love to see people in this room picking up and running with, and I'll be delighted to help you if that's of interest.
So we'll set up a stand for Barry later over beside the door. Thanks, Barry. Dónal, just kind of picking up, I suppose, on some of those kind of issues around the ethical AI, around the kind of role for Ireland. I mean, as IDA, how do you see Ireland positioning itself, if you like, in this space going forward?
I think one of the things we would always say to investors is, Ireland is, when you speak of trustworthy, Ireland is a trustworthy location. We've never invaded anybody. Not that I'm aware of, at least anyway. And not that we're a boring safe pair of hands, but Ireland is a safe pair of hands for companies to put their trusted assets, whether that's people or technology or finances. And we've built that since the founding of the EU, absolutely, but even back to the founding of IDA 74 years ago. So that's a reputation that we've built up carefully and improved upon, hopefully, over the last 70 plus years. So as a location, how we position Ireland is a location where you can put your most trusted assets, where you can find really high quality people, whether that's engineers or people to run your operations, your global operations, and where there's a regulatory environment that you can fit into. And I think GDPR, obviously, it's had its critics, but Helen does a super job in terms of setting a very clear landscape for GDPR in Ireland, for Ireland being the lead authority for some of the world's global brands and global companies. And if we can replicate that from an AI regulatory perspective, I think that's something that we can really build on. And I mentioned earlier on, we are speaking to companies about how they solve those regulatory challenges and putting regulatory functions here, not just from a business sense, but from an engineering sense as well. And that's a huge opportunity for us, and I think one we can absolutely build on over the coming years.
Okay, that's a really, I think, positive messaging, I think, for us as a broad Team Ireland to take away with us. Ciarán, if I could just ask you, as someone, who is in a startup, how have you found operating, if you like? I think we talked earlier just off stage just about this very question in a way about a trusted provider. And how do you, I suppose, sell yourself as such to a company, but how do you operate, whether it's in the EU or the US, differences and so on?
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely an interesting kind of dilemma between, if you look at the US and the EU. A lot of our business is in the US, and so for us, building in the EU and scaling in the US has been an interesting journey. And I think what we've learned is the EU are very good when it comes to regulations. As Dónal said, we have GDPR. The EU AI Act is now coming in. The US is slightly behind in that, and so that's been a tailwind that we've been able to take advantage of, in that we've built our technology within this regulation, kind of regulation foothold. And so when we go to the US then and we have those conversations, as Dónal said, that trust is there. The trust, the quality of product, because we're building in Ireland, building in the EU, it's well received. I think it's also interesting to look at it from an investment perspective. If you look at a triangle of what's actually happening here, you've companies in the middle, startups that are selling a product. You've clients who are buying a product. You've regulators who are regulating the product, and then you've investors who are injecting capital in to build it. And there can be kind of a lack of alignment in some cases with incentives, where investors are trying to push money to make innovation happen fast. You've regulators who are trying to really fastly catch up and figure out what kind of technology is being built, how is it being used, the ethical piece, are we taking ethical considerations into account when we're building these products? And so, where we see an advantage for ourselves as a vertical AI company, so we solve a very particular use case of health and safety in the industrial workplace. We see a massive advantage there because we can engage with regulators. We can actually feedback, not for our own purposes, but feedback the information that we're seeing to try and make this feedback loop happen more kind of naturally, if you will. And so that's the way we think about it when we look at the EU and the US.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And Barry, if I might just ask you, because I know you've worked at the EU level for several years, in terms of the research piece, and I suppose that horizon scanning, and we're all talking, okay, this maybe was a quick development, 50 years in the making, but looking forward, how do you do that successfully and ensure that the regulations aren't out of date by the time they're in place?
Yeah, I think there's two things there. I think one needs to create the environment in which one can really innovate in AI, and I think if you look internationally, what's happening a lot in, for example, research funding, is that research funding is becoming very focused on the applied, on the immediate term, I suppose, supporting companies and doing what companies are doing. And I would argue that's not the right policy. One of my favorite scientific essays is an essay called The Usefulness of Useless Knowledge. And it's written by Alexandra Flexner, who was the founding director of the Princeton Institute for Advanced Studies. And there's nobody, I think, can argue that the Princeton Institute for Advanced Studies has been enormously successful. It has the highest density of Nobel Prize winners in the world. But I think we really have to allow, I suppose, the researchers and those who want to think about the long-term issues, I think we need to give them space. And that's really important in AI, because, and for a very concrete reason. If you look at a company like DeepMind literally burns $1 billion every year on fundamental research. If you were to sweep up all of the publicly available funding for basic research, you would not get $1 billion, right? So there are companies out there who are doing this, and we should be concerned about that, because DeepMind is a fantastic company, but we shouldn't allow a reality to continue where the private sector dictate the agenda and what people are responding to. And if you think of the stories that we've heard about and that have sort of captured our imagination over the last 12 to 18 months, they've all come from the private sector. Now, why should we be worried about that? We should be worried about that because we don't always want to be catching up with these technologies. We want to be sort of part of the discussion.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we really need to work with. I think the second piece is the regulation. We should make sure that does not get in the way. And there is, of course, the risk that it does. There are companies who are already shying away from using the term artificial intelligence. And this is something we should be concerned about. And like the funny thing about AI regulation in particular is that there's no reason why are we regulating AI? We're regulating AI because we're concerned about its impacts on society and impacts on fundamental rights. But AI is not the only technology that has those consequences. So it's kind of strange that we have a regulation that regulates a technology that nobody can really define. You know, when I was vice chair of the high-level expert group, we had 52 people in the room. And we said we naively thought that the first task we should do is define AI. After 6 weeks of argument, of the 52 members, we had 51 different definitions of AI, and that's because the person from one particular company didn't show up, and you know, we kind of just gave up with this definition because you know we couldn't agree. But yet that's going to be the basis for a law. So. Now, I'm delighted because I hope to spend my time in courtrooms arguing whether it's a biscuit or a bar, frankly. But I think the real thing we should have been regulating, of course, is algorithmic decision-making. So I think we need to get the scientific policy right, we need to get the regulation right, we need to support the startups and the really smart people. We don't have to make the likes of me, the likes of my students, look like this fantastic individual. He knows how to build startup companies. And I think he knows how to take the kind of work that I do, and he knows how to commercialize it. And I think that diversity in the ecosystem is something that's really, really important, and something that I think internationally we tend to lose a little bit because the taxpayer wants to see short-term value for money, and they forget that there is a usefulness in useless knowledge.
I think that's yet again something to take away. Dónal, could I ask you, because I think just, what Barry has just been talking about there really, I suppose, speaks also to AI literacy. And, you mentioned earlier STEM, kind of the value of STEM here in Ireland. I mean, as a IDA, when you're looking at kind of a workforce here and how you're kind of positioning that workforce, is AI literacy something that you think needs to be increased, or how do you see that as an issue in terms of a skilled workforce going ahead?
Yeah, well, the simple answer would be yes. The more literate we are in AI, the better as an economy, as a country, and certainly for the work that IDA does. I think, when we were coming out of the recession, 2009, 2010, 11, that sort of time frame, we had some problems as a country, and IDA, there was a lot of eyes in IDA to help to kind of bring that unemployment rate down from a very high level of 15-16%. And thankfully it did come down quite quickly through lots of people's efforts and some fortuitous wins along the way. But what we did in that time frame as well was a really significant increase in STEM skills. It's about 70% from 2012 to 2020. Okay. Also an increase in the level of female participation in STEM. Now, Alessandra will tell me very frequently that it's not enough, and she's absolutely right, it is not enough. But we have made some progress over the years. I think just on a broader level, though, just to build on what Barry said, and if you look at the stage here, we've got multinationals represented, we've got academia and research, we've got the startup scene representative, and government. My former colleague Ken Finnegan would have talked about the triple and quadruple helix of those components. And Ireland, in Ireland, those components work very well together and work quite closely together. What's changed actually in the last 20 years is SFI has really helped to really support world-class research that Barry is a part of. And Enterprise Ireland have done an amazing job in building the startup ecosystem, and it really complements what IDA does, so that when we're talking to global investors who look at Ireland, being able to talk about that, I won't really use it in front of an investor, but that quadruple helix of all of those four elements working together, it's really, really powerful. But to go back to your question, absolutely, we need to make sure that kids at a very early stage understand AI, not just from the benefits of it, but some of the dangers of it as well. But that conversation continues right through education into university, and that no matter what course you're doing in university, whether it's financial services or core software engineering, that you come out with a fundamental understanding of the power and the challenges in AI and how it interacts with the career that they're going to choose.
Thanks. No, I think that's a really important message for us as Team Ireland, also just to be conscious of that kind of across the disciplines, not just diplomacy, not just academia, not just government. Alessandra, yes, and I was just going to ask you to come in anyway. Yes.
One little point that I think is relevant for this discussion, the diversity that we have in Ireland, it's not to be underestimated. I see through the lenses of enterprise that needs to wire with diversity when we invest in AI technology, and the level of talent that we can hire here in Ireland with a high level qualification coming pretty much from anywhere in the world. I have 2 people from South Africa, Canada, US, Asia, many regions covered, Europe obviously. So the level of diversity that we have in this moment in Ireland, it's a real gem and rare to find in other countries, and therefore it encourages company to exit other base. Even a US-led company is leaving all the engineering and AI development in Ireland, because there is a huge value here. And yes, female representation is not yet where we want to be, but during the last, I would say 10 years, we have done so much in master level program, foundation level program dedicated to diversity for female, for minority groups, that now we are starting to see the benefit coming through the pipeline.
Thank you, Alessandra. And I mean, I was just, in terms of, again, getting back to that ethical AI, and I suppose the gender, aspect, when we talk about the challenges of ethical AI, but also, I suppose, potentially the positives around AI if you're using the correct data set, can hopefully avoid bias. I mean, what do you consider about that argument? I think it has pros and cons, because then, of course, if you're using an outmoded data set, that's a difficulty. But just from your own experience, how you found that?
I love that argument. And I go back to the example of medicine. Females have been excluded from many medical studies for years, and this is well known. But no one could really quantify and understand the impact of seeing how many doctors have been studied based on results coming from very biased studies. Today, with AI, there is a single point where we can go in and do an assessment, do a data audit, and understand how much bias there is in that system, and therefore correct for. So today, we are actually at an inflection point that if we build this technology properly, and if we audit this technology properly, it can finally help women to be better represented, better served. And I speak about women, but we can speak about any sort of diversity you have in mind. Those arguments applies at the same level.
Thank you. No, and absolutely, it does apply across so many different categories. I think we're probably coming close to the end now. And the invidious question, if I had to say to you, for us as Team Ireland here in the room and listening online, if you had to kind of sum up, I suppose, in a minute, each of you, something to take away, a message to take away for Team Ireland as it looks at AI, as it looks at tech, and looks at Ireland as a destination possibly for investment for that, what would you say to someone who asks you what is one key point to keep in mind? We might start, Barry, with you.
Sure. So, as I said earlier, I think the thing that's not spoken about very much is the interface between the relationship between AI and the practice of diplomacy. And I think AI is impacting geopolitics every day. And I think we have, not only is it impacting geopolitics, it's also impacting the practice of diplomacy. So what is the role of deep fakes, for example, in misdirection? The question of how democracy is undermined by AI technology. And I think Ireland has a fantastic role to play in putting itself in the middle of these very complex discussions and being the honest broker, being the country that is trusted, like we have been on many issues before. And I think AI is an issue that we can really own from a diplomacy point of view. And I don't know of any other country that's really stepping up to that. And I would encourage everybody here to think about how you might how that impacts what you're doing, and I think it's a fantastic opportunity. And I think you'll begin to see great riches. Last February in Washington, D.C., we ran a workshop on AI and diplomacy. You can go there and get a sense of the kinds of topics that are discussed. But I think, for me, that is the message I would like to give to the room. The other stuff, lots of people are doing the other stuff. And it's all important, but I think this is the stuff that's new and what this room could really lead in. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry. Ciarán.
Yeah, from my side, I'll stick with the startups. We've investors from the States, from Australia, from London, from Europe. And Antisha mentioned earlier connection. And I think what it's allowed us to do is to build a connection right across the globe in terms of customers, in terms of collaborators. And so I think doubling down on both investment in the startup ecosystem, because that's where a lot of the innovation comes from, but also in the academic sector as well. Dónal mentioned SFI. I was actually part of an SFI PhD program. Didn't quite make it the whole way through. I dropped out to set Protex up. But I think doubling down, parents weren't too happy with it at all.
No,
but,
I can imagine.
Anyway,
They must be delighted now, though.
I don't know. Yeah, that's very funny.
That's chiming with a few people in the audience, clearly.
Yeah, so yeah, I think just doubling down in investment in the startup ecosystem and in academia will supercharge our ability to continue to be one of the leaders in this space.
Thanks, Ciarán. And Dónal.
I think just to build on something Alessandra said and something that we've touched on elsewhere, it'd be remiss of me not to say a big thank you to the diplomatic community for the help that they've provided to Ireland in helping really talented people come in around the world, and that's really helped to build our diversity from an engineering capability, from a language capability, from a cultural capability, and that's going to be really important, as Alessandra mentioned, to build that diversity as we develop AI capability. So what I would say is we really need to keep that open mind and open borders as well. We can't supply enough talent from within our own shores. We can't even supply enough from within Europe. But as our competitors look at Ireland around the world and look at us quite jealously in terms of that ability we have to attract people as a nation that people want to come to. Clearly we've got some challenges in that, but as a nation people want to come to, that's really, really important. And just helping that diversity and helping it happen at speed when it needs to happen is really important, and the diplomatic community have been really super partners in that effort.
Absolutely, that's well merited, that appreciation there. And Alessandra, if I may finish with you.
Yeah, I second this point. Diversity is a key differentiator in AI. And then building on top of diversity, it's going back to fundamental research. We have seen ChatGPT, this foundation model, one approach that can be applied in so many different applications and can change businesses in so many different industries. So if we invest now, we continue to invest in diverse talent, and we invest even more in fundamental research that enables all those things to be realized in the future generation that will continue to develop, I think we will create that human capital difference and that technological difference that will continue to position Ireland as a leading country in AI.
Thank you very much. I think this has been a really positive panel, and I think perhaps, hopefully, we've debunked slightly maybe the existential threat meme. Hopefully, because I think as Team Ireland going ahead, it is to capitalise on the positives, recognising, of course, the challenges, but saying, look, best foot forward and building on the skills, building on the diversity, building on the trusted provider and supplier model. So I'd just like to ask you to express your appreciation for the panel as we conclude.